The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Elisa tightened her grip on the edge of the oak bench. She sat alone, her palms clammy, her breath shallow. The courtroom smelled of varnish and something faintly metallic, maybe her own fear. It was early fall in Pennsylvania, the kind of chilly morning where breath fogged in the air outside but melted quickly inside the courthouse's heated corridors. Across the aisle, Martin sat with impeccable posture, flanked by his attorney. His navy suit looked untouched by the wear of real life. His hands folded on the table, calm and collected, the image of professionalism. Elisa hated how smooth he looked. She knew that face too well. It had charmed juries, deceived clients, and once, broken her heart. Now it aimed to take Clara away. Judge Harmon entered briskly, his robe sweeping behind him. The room rose, then settled. Elisa's lawyer, a younger woman named Priya Shah, leaned close and whispered, "Stay calm. No matter what he says, we hold steady." Easier said than done. Martin's attorney rose first. "Your Honor, this is a straightforward case of maternal instability. My client, Mr. Bennett, has provided consistent care, financial stability, and a safe environment for Clara. Meanwhile, Ms. Torres, has demonstrated erratic behavior, emotional volatility, and a pattern of poor decision-making." Elisa flinched at the name correction. Even now, stripped of his surname, she felt exposed. The judge nodded, then turned to Priya. "Ms. Shah?" Priya stood, collected, and measured. "Your Honor, we contend that Ms. Torres has been the primary caregiver since Clara's birth. Any incidents cited by the opposition are exaggerated or taken out of context. We have character witnesses and documentation to support this." Judge Harmon looked bored. He scribbled something on his notepad and said, "Let's proceed with testimonies. Mr. Bennett, please take the stand." Elisa watched Martin walk with confidence to the witness chair. His voice was soft, persuasive, drenched in practiced humility. "I've always put Clara first. When Elisa began to unravel, I did what I had to do to protect our daughter." The words hung heavy. Then came the photos, Elisa crying in the hallway after her mother's funeral, the late-night texts asking Martin to take Clara for the weekend, the audio recording of a single, shouted argument. All taken out of context. "All real," Priya objected repeatedly, and Judge Harmon sustained some, but the tone had been set. The judge leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "Ms. Torres, your turn." Elisa stood. Her legs wobbled beneath her skirt. She felt every eye on her as she made her way to the stand. The microphone trembled in front of her. "I've made mistakes," she began. "But I have never, ever, stopped being Clara's mother. I was there at every parent-teacher meeting. Every doctor's appointment. I was the one holding her during asthma attacks at 2 a.m. I've been there." Martin scoffed audibly. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Ms. Torres, do you have any actual evidence to support that?" Her heart pounded. She looked toward Priya, who gave a slight nod. "Now or never." Elisa reached into her bag and pulled out the envelope. White, creased at the corners, the label simple, DNA Diagnostics Center. "I do," she said, voice shaking. "This letter contains a DNA test proving that Martin Bennett is not Clara's biological father." The courtroom gasped. Martin's expression didn't flinch, but his eyes flickered, just for a second. The judge leaned forward. "Is this some kind of stunt?" he asked, clearly annoyed. "No, Your Honor," Elisa replied. "I'm submitting it as evidence. And I have notarized consent for the test. You can verify it. I only did it because I had to be sure. Because if this court is questioning my right to be Clara's mother, then the truth needs to be on the record." Silence filled the room. Even Martin was speechless now. Judge Harmon took the envelope, motioned to the clerk, and ordered a recess. Elisa exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. The truth was out. But the battle had just begun. The hallway outside the courtroom was sterile, lit by rows of fluorescent lights that hummed in a monotonous rhythm. Elisa stood by the vending machine, her fingers wrapped around a bottle of water she hadn't opened. Around her, other attorneys and families whispered and passed by, but no one looked her in the eye. She didn't need their judgment, she'd lived with it for years. Priya paced in front of her, scanning her phone. "The judge is reviewing the DNA results with the clerk. This buys us time and leverage." Elisa nodded slowly, still dazed. "Do you think it's enough?" Priya stopped pacing. "It changes everything, Elisa. He's been making this about you being unfit. But if he's not Clara's biological father and knew it? That's a betrayal of the court. If he didn't know, it undermines his entire narrative. Either way, it puts us on the offensive." Elisa looked down the hall, toward the courtroom door. "He didn't know. Are you sure?" "I never told him. Clara was a surprise. I didn't even do the test until a few months ago. Something just didn't sit right. So I did it. Alone. Quietly." Priya softened. "That had to be hard." Elisa smiled bitterly. It wrecked me. But not as much as knowing I had to bring it here. Inside the courtroom, Martin sat frozen, staring at the opposite wall. His lawyer whispered furiously into his ear, but he didn't move. The man who had manipulated every narrative, twisted every fact, now looked like he'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. Judge Harmon returned 15 minutes later, his expression unreadable. Court is back in session. Elisa and Priya took their seats. Martin's hands twitched in his lap. The judge adjusted his glasses. I've reviewed the document submitted by Ms. Torres. The DNA results appear legitimate and legally obtained. Mr. Bennett, do you wish to respond? Martin stood, unsteady for the first time. I didn't know. I believed Clara was mine. Elisa never told me otherwise. The judge raised a brow. And had you known, would you have pursued full custody? Martin hesitated. Of course. I raised her as my own. I love her. But your petition argued that Ms. Torres was fundamentally unfit and dangerous. That's a strong claim for someone whose parental standing is now legally questionable. Martin glanced toward Elisa, his face tense. I was trying to protect Clara. I didn't think, that much is clear, the judge cut in. We will reconvene tomorrow. I want full briefs from both parties on how this new information impacts custodial rights, and I expect absolute transparency moving forward. He banged the gavel. Court adjourned. Elisa stood slowly, her knees weak. Priya placed a reassuring hand on her back. We just flipped the power dynamic. That's huge. But the victory felt hollow. She had exposed a secret that could change everything about how Clara saw her world. As they walked toward the courthouse exit, Martin called out, Elisa. She turned. His voice was low, raw. You really didn't tell me? No, she said. I didn't think it mattered. You were her father, Martin. You still are. Just, not the way you thought. He looked like a man grappling with something too big to carry. Why now? Because I had no choice. Outside, the sky was bruising with the first hints of twilight. Elisa felt the chill settle into her bones. Tomorrow, they'd return to that courtroom and start again, but now, with the truth laid bare, and that truth, as painful as it was, finally gave her a fighting chance. Morning light crept through Elisa's kitchen window, casting soft shadows over the untouched cup of coffee on the table. The air was still, too quiet for a Friday. She hadn't slept. After the court adjourned, she'd returned home to an empty house. Clara had stayed the night at a friend's. Per the temporary custody schedule, she should have felt relief. The DNA revelation had changed the case. But it didn't feel like victory. It felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing the hardest part was still ahead. Her phone buzzed. A message from Priya, court at 9. Be early. Martin's team filed a motion. Elisa's chest tightened. She grabbed her coat, keys, and the folder that had become her shield, documents, photos, school records, anything that showed she was the mother Clara had always known. The drive to the courthouse was short but thick with anxiety. Trees along the road blurred past, their leaves turning golden red. Autumn had always been Clara's favorite, apple picking, pumpkin carving, the scent of cinnamon in the house. Elisa clung to those memories like armor. Inside the courthouse lobby, Priya met her with a solemn expression. He's filed for an emergency hearing to challenge the DNA results, she said. What? On what grounds? He's claiming the test was unauthorized, that you violated Clara's privacy. Elisa's breath caught. She's 15. I'm her legal guardian. I know. But he's trying to spin it as unethical, an invasion. It's a distraction tactic. We're ready. The courtroom buzzed with new energy. Reporters had picked up the story, a high-profile custody battle, a surprise paternity twist. Elisa saw the flash of a phone camera before the bailiff ordered it put away. Martin looked different this morning. Not shaken, like the day before, but sharp. Controlled. Dangerous. His lawyer stood. Your Honor, we motion to exclude the DNA results on the basis that they were obtained without the child's knowledge or consent, and that their introduction constitutes a violation of her right to medical privacy. Judge Harmon raised an eyebrow. Ms. Torres is the child's mother and legal guardian. Yes, but not her sole guardian. Mr. Bennett was not consulted, and the child herself was unaware of the test. We argue this creates emotional harm. Priya stood calmly. Your Honor, there's no statute in Pennsylvania requiring dual parental consent for a legal guardian to authorize a DNA test on a minor. Furthermore, the test did not involve invasive procedures, just a cheek swab. Ms. Torres acted within her rights. The judge nodded slowly. The motion to exclude is denied. The results stand. Elisa exhaled deeply. Martin stared straight ahead, jaw clenched. Now, the judge continued, I'd like to hear from the minor. I believe Clara's voice is critical to understanding what's best for her. Elisa's stomach turned. She hadn't told Clara about the DNA test. Not directly. Not yet. Court recessed briefly. In the hallway, Priya turned to Elisa. She's in the witness room. They'll bring her in after lunch. Elisa nodded, fighting panic. What if she hates me for this? Priya's tone was firm. You didn't do this to hurt her. You did it to protect her. Trust that she'll feel that. Elisa paced the hallway, her thoughts spinning. She remembered Clara as a toddler, climbing into her lap with sticky fingers and endless questions. Then Clara at 8, refusing to speak to Martin after a fight. At 12, sobbing in Elisa's arms after overhearing her father say she was too emotional. Clara was smart, sensitive. And now, being asked to step into a storm she didn't choose. Back in the courtroom, the door opened, and Clara walked in, tall for her age, dark curls pulled back, eyes wide but steady. She glanced at both parents, her expression unreadable, and took the stand. The judge leaned forward. Clara, do you understand why you're here today? She nodded. Yes. Do you feel comfortable speaking about your home life? Clara looked at Martin, then Elisa. I want to live with my mom. A pause. Even Martin flinched. The judge kept his tone neutral. Can you tell me why? Clara swallowed. Because she listens to me. Even when I'm a mess. Because she doesn't pretend things are perfect, but she's there. Always. She looked at Martin. I know you love me. But everything's always about being right. Or winning. Mom doesn't make me choose sides. She just lets me be me. Elisa's vision blurred. She blinked quickly, holding herself still. And the DNA test? The judge asked. Clara took a breath. It doesn't change who raised me. He was my dad. But if that's not the truth, I still deserve to know it. And I deserve to choose. The courtroom fell silent. Judge Harmon nodded slowly. Thank you, Clara. That was very brave. As she stepped down, Clara looked at Elisa. Just a glance. But it was enough. Elisa knew, in that moment, no matter what the law decided, she hadn't lost her daughter. She'd found her voice. The afternoon air in the courtroom felt heavier, the quiet more pronounced after Clara's testimony. Elisa sat frozen, hands clasped tightly in her lap, trying to keep her breath steady. The moment her daughter looked at her, really looked at her, had cracked something inside. Not in a painful way, but in a way that let light pour through. Judge Harmon had recessed court for 15 minutes, giving everyone time to collect themselves. When he returned, the atmosphere was taut with anticipation. This court has heard unexpected and emotionally complex testimony, he began. It is clear this case has evolved beyond the original custodial dispute. We must now address the broader context, parental fitness, emotional stability, and the role of truth in raising a child. Elisa's spine straightened. She knew what was coming next. Her turn on the stand. Priya gave her a steady nod. Remember who you are. Not who he says you are. Elisa approached the witness stand. As she settled into the chair, the cushion felt thin, almost non-existent beneath her. She placed her hands in her lap, hiding the slight tremor in her fingers. Martin's attorney wasted no time. Ms. Torres, would you describe yourself as emotionally stable? A trap question, dressed as something simple. Elisa breathed in. I'm human. I've had breakdowns, like anyone facing grief, betrayal, and fear. But I've never endangered my daughter. Never made her feel unsafe. I've always gotten up, no matter how hard it was. The attorney circled her like a predator. And yet we have recordings of you yelling, texts where you appear desperate, erratic behavior. Yes, Elisa said firmly. Because I was desperate. I was losing time with my child. I was being isolated, gaslit, pushed. You can cherry-pick any moment in someone's life and twist it. But if you want the whole picture, ask Clara. The attorney turned to the judge. Let's be clear. Ms. Torres kept a paternity secret for over 15 years. She tested her daughter behind her back. Does that sound like emotional fitness to you? Elisa spoke before the judge could. I kept the secret because I didn't know the truth until recently. I didn't test Clara behind her back. I tested because I had to know what I was fighting for. I never wanted to use the results like a weapon. But when I was painted as unstable, when I was being erased from my own daughter's life, I had no choice. A pause. Martin's lawyer tried again. And the biological father? Who is he? Elisa's voice was calm, low. I'm not sure. It was a difficult time. There were overlaps, but I believed Martin was the father. We were engaged. He signed the birth certificate. Do you plan to contact the biological father now? No. Clara has a father, whether by biology or not, and that's her choice to define. My priority is her emotional safety, not reopening old wounds. Judge Harmon held up a hand. That's enough for now. Elisa returned to her seat, pulse racing. Priya whispered, you did good. Martin was called next. He strode to the stand with practiced ease, but the cracks were there. His tie was slightly crooked, his face paler than usual. "Mr. Bennett," the judge began, "you've presented yourself as the more stable parent. You've emphasized Elisa's volatility. But now, with the DNA results, your own position is unclear. How do you respond?" Martin inhaled deeply. "I raised Clara as my daughter. From the day she was born. I fed her, bathed her, read to her, took her to ballet and soccer. I sat through nightmares and heartbreaks. Biology doesn't erase that." "No. One is suggesting it does," the judge said. "But your petition calls into question Ms. Torres's entire capacity as a parent. Was that based solely on her behavior, or was there something else?" Martin hesitated. "It was fear. She was falling apart. And I thought, if I didn't act, Clara would suffer." "Did you manipulate or exaggerate those claims?" "No. But I may have highlighted them." Priya stood. "Mr. Bennett, is it true you once told Clara her mother was too emotional to be trusted?" Martin looked down. "I might have said that. I was angry." "And did you encourage Clara to record her mother during a private argument?" Another pause. "I told her to be aware. To protect herself." Elisa closed her eyes. The betrayal in that moment landed heavier than before, because now it was said out loud, in front of everyone. The judge called for another recess. As the room emptied, Martin approached Elisa quietly. "I didn't want this to get so ugly," he murmured. Elisa didn't look at him. "You didn't want to lose. She's still my daughter. She's not a prize. She's a person." He swallowed hard, but said nothing more. Outside the courthouse, autumn wind scattered leaves. Across the steps, Elisa sat on a stone bench, arms folded, jacket pulled tight. She didn't know what the judge would decide. But she knew this: she had stood her ground. Spoken the truth. Protected her child, not with manipulation, but with honesty and love, and in that, she had already reclaimed part of what was taken. Rain slicked the courthouse steps as Elisa climbed them, her coat clinging to her shoulders, hair damp from the morning drizzle. The storm outside mirrored the one inside her chest, not as wild as before, but persistent. The kind that soaks into you slowly, chilling from the inside out. Clara hadn't come home the night before. Martin had insisted she stay with him, to avoid more stress. Elisa didn't argue. She couldn't. Not without giving Martin what he wanted, a chance to call her combative again. Priya met her at the entrance, holding a folder thick with printouts. "He's shifting strategy." Elisa's heart dropped. "To what?" "They're attacking your past. Not just your parenting. Your early 20s. Relationships. A job you left after 3 months. An incident with your sister from years ago." Elisa blinked. "My sister?" Priya nodded grimly. "She gave a deposition. Claimed you were emotionally unstable after your father died. That you cut off contact with your family. Martin's attorney is painting a picture of long-term instability." Elisa looked away, jaw tightening. "I did cut them off. They weren't safe for me. I was trying to protect myself." "I believe you. But they're twisting it. We'll respond, just be ready." The courtroom felt colder today. The media presence had grown. A local reporter sat in the back row, scribbling notes. Elisa ignored them. Her focus was the bench, the judge, and the life she was fighting to preserve. Martin's attorney took the floor, voice smooth and deliberate. "We submit a timeline of Ms. Torres's emotional instability," she began, displaying documents. On a screen, emails from years past, excerpts from therapy notes that had been subpoenaed. In 2010, she voluntarily admitted herself to a wellness facility for depressive symptoms. In 2014, she quit her job after a confrontation with a supervisor. In 2017, she stopped speaking to her family. And in 2020, she broke down during a parent-teacher conference. This is not a single episode of distress, it is a pattern. Elisa stared at the screen, heart pounding. Each event was true, but none told the whole story. Priya rose. "May I redirect?" The judge nodded. "Ms. Torres, did you admit yourself to a wellness facility in 2010? "Yes," Elisa said clearly. "After my father's sudden death. I was grieving. And I sought help. I went voluntarily, followed every recommendation, and came out stronger." "Did you leave your job in 2014 because of a confrontation?" "Yes. My manager made repeated, unwanted advances. HR refused to intervene. I walked away instead of compromising my integrity." "And your family estrangement?" Elisa swallowed. "My sister and I had a toxic relationship. After our mother died, things escalated. She manipulated, blamed, and triggered episodes of panic. I chose peace. I chose to step away." Priya took a step forward. "And the parent-teacher conference?" Elisa smiled slightly. "Clara had just been diagnosed with an anxiety disorder. I was overwhelmed. I cried. And then I pulled myself together, got her the therapy she needed, and made a plan with her school. The judge scribbled notes as Priya continued. Miss Torres, have you ever been investigated by Child Protective Services? No, ever. Been charged with a crime? No, ever physically harmed your daughter? Absolutely not. Priya paused. Thank you. Martin shifted uncomfortably as his attorney sat down. Elisa returned to her seat, hands steady this time. The narrative was being reclaimed, not erased, but redefined. She wasn't a perfect mother. She was a real one. Later, in the hallway, Priya pulled her aside. He's losing ground. The judge sees the manipulation. But you need to prepare Clara. For what? He'll go after her next. Not to hurt her directly, but to undermine her judgment. To say she's been influenced. Coached. Elisa's breath caught. She doesn't deserve that. No. But this is custody court. They'll use every tool. That evening, Clara came home. She stood in the doorway, backpack still slung over one shoulder, eyes tired but bright. Hey, she said. Elisa wrapped her arms around her. Hey. They sat on the couch, shoes still on, silence stretching between them. I heard what he's trying to do, Clara said finally. I didn't want you to find out like this. It's okay. I'm not stupid. I know he's scared. Elisa looked at her daughter, not a child anymore, but not yet grown. Somewhere in the in-between, forging strength from chaos. I need to ask you something hard, Elisa said. Are you ready to speak again? In court? Clara nodded slowly. Yeah, I am. And for the first time in days, Elisa exhaled without fear. The storm hadn't passed, but now, they were walking through it together. Monday arrived with a gray, unmoving sky, as if the world itself had paused to hold its breath. The courthouse felt colder than before, the marble floors unforgiving under Elisa's boots, the air inside brittle with anticipation. Clara sat beside her in the hallway, dressed in dark jeans and a navy sweater, her curls tucked behind her ears. She fidgeted with the ring Elisa had given her on her 13th birthday, a small silver band with an engraved star. A talisman of steadiness. You don't have to do this if you're not ready, Elisa said, her voice soft but firm. Clara looked up. I want to. I need to. They called her in just after 10. The courtroom hushed as she walked to the stand, her figure small but composed. She took the oath with a calm voice, then sat upright, folding her hands in her lap. Judge Harmon began. Clara, I know this is difficult. Take your time. Speak honestly. She nodded, then looked directly at her father. Dad, she began. You raised me. You taught me how to ride a bike, helped with math homework, made pancakes on Sundays. I know you love me. But somewhere along the way, something changed. Martin's jaw tightened. You stopped listening. You made everything about control. Mom would try to talk to you, and you'd twist it around. Make her feel crazy. And then you started doing that with me. The courtroom was silent. Even the reporters had stopped writing. When I told you I wanted to live with Mom more, you said I was being manipulated. You said she was unstable. But that wasn't true. She was just hurt. She was trying. And you made her feel like she wasn't enough. She turned toward the judge. When I found out about the DNA test, I was shocked. I didn't know how to process it. But it didn't change how I saw my mom. Or even my dad. It just made everything more complicated. Judge Harmon leaned forward. What do you want, Clara? She paused. A deep breath. Then, I want to live with my mom. I want to see my dad, too, but on my terms. Not in a war zone. I don't want to be the rope in a tug-of-war anymore. Martin's lawyer rose slowly. Clara, would you say your mother ever talked negatively about your father in front of you? No, Clara said, without hesitation. She defended you. Even when I didn't want her to. She always said you loved me. She never asked me to choose. Has she ever told you what to say in court? No. She told me to be honest. The attorney shifted tactics. And do you think you're mature enough to make this decision on your own? Clara narrowed her eyes, her voice clear and steady. I'm 15. I've watched both of them. Fight for me, and fight through me. I know what I've lived. I'm not confused. The questioning ended. Judge Harmon closed his notebook, visibly moved. Thank you, Clara. You may step down. Clara returned to her seat next to Elisa. The moment she sat, Elisa reached over and gently squeezed her hand. Neither said a word. There was nothing more to say. Everything that mattered had been spoken. After a brief recess, the judge announced that closing arguments would take place the following day. There would be no more witnesses. No more surprise motions. Only final words. Outside the courthouse, the sun had pierced through the clouds for the first time in days. Elisa and Clara walked down the steps slowly, feeling the warmth on their faces. You were incredible, Elisa said. Clara smiled faintly. I meant every word. They stopped near a bench. People passed by, lawyers, couples, courthouse staff. but the world had narrowed to just the two of them. Whatever happens tomorrow, Elisa said, her voice catching, you need to know, you are the bravest person I've ever known. Clara looked up, tears welling in her eyes. You too, Mom. That night, back home, they curled up on the couch, neither reaching for the television or their phones. They just sat, shoulder to shoulder, watching the quiet rhythm of the rain returning outside. Tomorrow, a decision would be made, but today, for this one precious moment, they had peace. The final day of the hearing dawned cold and brilliant, the sky scrubbed clear by the rainstorm the night before. Elisa stood before her bathroom mirror, applying a thin layer of concealer beneath her eyes. She hadn't slept well. Who could? On the day their entire world might shift with a judge's sentence? Clara had left early for school. Normalcy, or the illusion of it, was something Priya insisted they protect. You've done everything right, Priya had told her on the phone. Now it's about framing that truth with clarity and strength. In the courtroom, a subtle tension lingered in the air, not the sharp anxiety of earlier days, but a heavy anticipation. Both sides knew this was the end, the last words, the final impressions. Judge Harmon entered without fanfare, his face unreadable as always. We'll proceed directly to closing arguments, he announced. Miss Shah, you may begin. Priya stood, her presence calm and grounded. She walked toward the bench with slow confidence, a single sheet of notes in her hand. Your Honor, she began, this is not a story about perfection. It is not about who can present the cleanest life, or the most curated version of parenting. This is a story about resilience. About love that doesn't flinch in the face of struggle. She paused, letting the words settle. Ms. Torres has never denied her flaws. She has faced grief, instability, and even shame, and she faced them head on. She asked for help. She sought healing. And through it all, she remained the most constant, nurturing presence in Clara's life. Priya stepped closer to the judge's bench. Mr. Bennett, by contrast, used his legal expertise not to protect Clara, but to weaponize her. To create a narrative built not on care, but control. He questioned the mother of his child not because she failed, but because she felt, and that vulnerability threatened the neat, ordered image he needed to maintain. She turned briefly to glance at Elisa, then back to the judge. Elisa Torres is not perfect. But she is real. She is present. And she has fought with everything she has to protect her daughter, not just from harm, but from erasure. That is the mark of a true parent. She stepped back. Martin's attorney rose next, methodical and practiced. Your Honor, she said, we acknowledge the emotional weight of this case. But emotion alone does not determine custody. Stability does. Responsibility does. And my client has provided both, consistently, since Clara's birth. She paced gently in front of the bench. Ms. Torres made a unilateral decision to conduct a DNA test on a minor, introducing a truth that may have long-term psychological consequences. She has a documented history of mental instability, estranged family ties, and emotional volatility. These are not fabrications, they are patterns. She turned toward Martin, who met the judge's gaze without blinking. Mr. Bennett is not perfect either. But he has never wavered in his commitment to Clara. Regardless of biology, he has acted as her father in every sense of the word. To now diminish that role based on technicalities would do Clara more harm than good. Saturday the judge folded his hands, quiet for a long moment. I will take the afternoon to review the case. My ruling will be delivered tomorrow morning. Gavel down, the court recessed outside. The tension exploded the moment the courthouse doors closed behind them. Reporters surged forward, cameras rolling. Elisa, any comment on today's testimony? Do you believe you'll win custody? What's your response to claims of instability? Priya stepped between Elisa and the press. No comment at this time. They pushed through the crowd. Elisa kept her eyes down, focused only on the street ahead. At the corner, she broke into a slow walk, letting the cool wind hit her face. How do you think it went? She finally asked. Priya was quiet for a beat. We showed him what mattered. Clara's voice, your consistency, the truth. That's what judges remember. Not polished resumes or rehearsed outrage. Elisa nodded slowly, then stopped walking. If I don't win, Priya looked at her squarely. Then we appeal. But no matter what, you showed Clara that she's worth fighting for. That never disappears. That night, the house was quiet again. Clara came home, sat on the edge of Elisa's bed, and simply asked, Are you okay? Elisa smiled faintly. Getting there. They lay side by side in the silence, not speaking, just breathing, two hearts tethered not by perfection, but by presence. Tomorrow, everything might change, but tonight, they held the moment. The courthouse loomed larger than ever as Elisa stepped from the car, its stone facade stark against the pale July morning. Birds chirped faintly in the distance, oblivious to the storm building inside her. Clara had stayed home. This wasn't Her moment to carry, today was Elisa's. She entered through the side door with Priya, bypassing the reporters waiting on the steps. Their faces were grim, curious. The story had spread beyond their county, drawing in public attention like wildfire. But for Elisa, none of that mattered. What mattered was what the judge was about to say. The courtroom filled quickly. Martin arrived alone, his suit crisp, expression unreadable. He nodded stiffly at Elisa, but she didn't acknowledge him. Her focus was razor-thin. Just one person mattered now. Judge Harmon entered with the same deliberate pace he always had, but there was a stillness to the room that hadn't been there before. The gravity was different. Permanent. He sat, adjusted his glasses, and looked down at his notes. Then he spoke. This case has presented complex emotional, legal, and ethical questions, he began. I've reviewed the testimony, the evidence, and the submitted documentation thoroughly. Custody is not a reward for the more organized household or the parent with fewer documented mistakes. It is not about punishing past flaws. His eyes moved from Elisa to Martin. It is about the best interests of the child, and the child has spoken. Elisa's breath stopped. Clara is not a passive participant in this case. She has expressed, with clarity and maturity, a desire to live primarily with her mother, Ms. Torres. She has done so not out of manipulation or coercion, but based on lived experience. Her statements were consistent, heartfelt, and supported by behavioral history. Martin shifted in his seat, shoulders stiff. Furthermore, the court cannot ignore the revelation of Clara's biological parentage. While it does not invalidate the emotional bond between Mr. Bennett and the child, it does introduce legal ambiguity regarding paternal rights. Given that, and in consideration of all factors presented, Elisa gripped the edge of her chair. I am awarding primary physical and legal custody of Clara Torres to her mother, Ms. Elisa Torres. Mr. Bennett will retain joint visitation rights, structured to ensure stability and emotional well-being for Clara, with all exchanges to occur via neutral third-party drop-off for the next 6 months. The words echoed in the room. For a moment, Elisa couldn't move. Couldn't think. Then she felt it, a release, quiet but powerful. Not joy. Not triumph. Something softer. Relief. Martin stood, silent, eyes fixed on the judge. He didn't argue. Didn't raise his voice. He only nodded once, a single, sharp gesture, and walked out of the courtroom without looking back. Elisa remained seated, her hands trembling slightly. Priya leaned in, smiling for the first time in weeks. You did it. I don't feel like I won, Elisa whispered. That's because this wasn't a victory. It was justice. Outside, the courthouse lawn was bright with sunlight. Reporters swarmed as she stepped down the steps, Priya shielding her from questions. But Elisa wasn't listening anymore. She was already thinking of Clara, how she'd tell her, what she'd say, how she'd explain that this wasn't the end of something, but the beginning of something else. Later that afternoon, at home, Clara burst through the door the moment she saw her mother's face. You got it. Elisa smiled, tears spilling over before she could stop them. Yes, baby. You're home. Clara wrapped her arms around her, holding tight. For a long time, they didn't speak. Just stayed there in the foyer, in the light of the late afternoon, locked in a silent embrace. When they finally pulled apart, Clara looked at her seriously. What happens now? Elisa brushed a strand of hair from her daughter's forehead. Now, we rebuild. Slowly. Gently. Together. And for the first time in months, Clara smiled, not with hesitation, not with fear, but with hope. The days after the verdict were strangely quiet. Not triumphant. Not celebratory. Just quiet. Elisa had imagined it differently, some wave of elation, a sense of finality. But instead, what she felt was more complicated, a deep, lingering exhaustion. And a grief she couldn't quite place. She had won custody. She had protected her daughter. But the cost had been steep. The first morning post-verdict, the house was filled with the soft clinking of coffee cups and the sound of Clara's footsteps upstairs. Elisa stood at the kitchen counter, watching steam curl from her mug, the smell of cinnamon toast drifting in the air. Normalcy, or some version of it, was returning. Clara came down, eyes still heavy with sleep. She grabbed a banana from the counter and sat quietly at the table. No phone, no headphones. Just the two of them, sharing the same space, cautiously reacquainting themselves with peace. Elisa sat across from her. How did you sleep? Clara shrugged. Better than before. It wasn't much, but it was honest. They spent the first weekend reorganizing Clara's room, not to erase the past few months, but to reclaim the space. They folded clothes together, sorted through old notebooks, tucked away childhood toys Clara didn't want to throw out just yet. In the back of her closet, Clara found an old shoebox filled with printed photos, birthday parties, vacations, awkward school pictures. She handed one to Elisa, a picture of the three of them at the beach, Clara on Martin's shoulders, Elisa squinting against the sun. Do we keep these? Clara asked. Elisa looked at the photo. Her heart tugged. That's your memory, she said softly. Not just his. Clara placed the photo back in the box. Then I'll keep it. They spoke little of Martin. There were weekly scheduled calls now, short, tense, often filled with small talk. Clara handled them politely but distantly. When she hung up, she never said much. Elisa didn't push, but one evening, Clara asked, "Did you ever love him?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Elisa paused, then nodded. I did. In the beginning. He wasn't always the man you saw in court. Or maybe. I didn't want to see who he really was. I wanted the family to work so badly, I ignored the rest. Clara looked down. Do you think he ever loved me? Elisa reached across the table and took her hand. He did. In his way. But love isn't always enough. It has to be safe. It has to be honest. That's what I want to give you now. Later that week, a letter arrived in the mail from Martin. It was addressed to Elisa, handwritten, the handwriting careful and unfamiliar. She read it alone in the kitchen. It was short. A mixture of apology and defense. No real acknowledgement of what he'd done, just shadows of guilt and the weight of lost control. He said he would respect the court's ruling. That he hoped someday Clara would understand his actions. Elisa folded it quietly and placed it in the drawer beneath the toaster. She didn't show it to Clara. Not yet. That night, Elisa sat on the porch while Clara studied inside. The air smelled of cut grass and summer dust. Fireflies blinked in the distance. And for the first time in a long while, Elisa allowed herself to close her eyes without fear. They weren't healed, but they were safe, and that, for now, was everything. August brought with it the thick, restless heat of late summer. School was still out, and the days stretched long and quiet. Elisa returned to freelance work, writing content for a health nonprofit from her small home office. Clara spent hours drawing, sketchbooks scattered across the living room floor like stepping stones to something unspoken. One afternoon, Clara appeared in the doorway of Elisa's office, her sketchpad clutched tightly to her chest. Can I ask you something? Elisa looked up from her laptop. Of course. Clara stepped in, eyes steady but uncertain. Do you know who my real dad is? The room seemed to shrink. Elisa closed her laptop slowly. I don't. I wish I did. Clara sat down across from her. How is that possible? Elisa hesitated. The year before you were born was chaotic. I was in a bad place emotionally. I was trying to move forward from a toxic relationship. And for a while, I didn't make the best choices. When I found out I was pregnant, I thought it was Martin's. I had no reason to doubt it. Not until recently. Clara studied her face. Were there other people around then? Elisa nodded. There were. And most of them are people I wouldn't want near you, even now. That's why I didn't dig too deep. I was protecting you. And myself. Clara looked down at her sketchpad. I don't know if I want to meet him. But part of me wonders. If he's out there. If he knows I exist. I've thought about that too, Elisa said quietly. But I don't think he does. Silence hung between them. Would you ever try to find him? Clara asked. I might, Elisa said. But only if you wanted that. Only if you were ready. Clara gave a faint nod, then stood. I think I just needed to know I could ask. Elisa reached for her hand. You always can. That evening, after Clara went to bed, Elisa pulled an old box from the back of her closet. Inside were faded journals, receipts, concert flyers, remnants of her 20s. She flipped through, pages shaking in her hands. A name caught her eye. Jake Arsh, someone she hadn't thought about in over 16 years. A one-night memory from a bar in Pittsburgh. Kind, a little lost, tattooed forearms and a surprising gentleness. He'd scribbled his number on a napkin. She never called. Elisa closed the journal. Her heart was racing. She didn't know if Jake was the one. She didn't know if she wanted to know, but Clara's eyes had been clear, not searching for a replacement, not desperate for fantasy. Just seeking a part of herself. The next morning, Elisa sat down with Priya over coffee. If I wanted to track someone from that long ago, she asked, where would I even start? Priya blinked. You're thinking about finding him? I'm thinking about being ready, in case Clara ever really wants to. Priya nodded slowly. We could start with social media, old tax records, people finder tools. It'll take time. I don't need a miracle. Just a direction. Back home, Clara was sitting on the porch steps, knees tucked under her chin. When Elisa joined her, they sat in silence, watching a thunderstorm build across the horizon. Did you ever wish your mom had told you more about her life? Clara asked suddenly. Elisa smiled. I used to think I didn't want to know. But now I realize, her silence wasn't about shame. It was about protection. I think I'm just starting to understand that. Clara looked over, eyes full of something deeper than curiosity now. Acceptance, we'll figure it out, she said, and Elisa believed her, not because she had all the answers, but because she finally stopped pretending she did. It began with a message in Priya's inbox. 3 weeks after Elisa mentioned the name Jake R., Priya had quietly launched a search using legal databases and social media threads. She hadn't said much, didn't want to raise hopes or stir fears. But now, as she sat across from Elisa in the cafe where they often met, her expression was tight with caution. I found something, she said. Elisa felt her stomach drop. What? There's a Jacob Rivers who lived in Pittsburgh around the time you mentioned. He worked at a bar called the Copper Line, closed now, but I traced his name through old employment records. He moved to Ohio in 2010, and he now owns a small auto repair shop outside of Akron. Elisa stared at her coffee cup, her pulse quickening. Did you reach out? She asked, her voice thin. No. I wouldn't do that without you. But I found a photo. He's older, of course, but, look. Priya handed her a printed page. Elisa took it slowly, eyes scanning the face. Salt and pepper beard. Laugh lines. A calm presence behind the eyes, and something else. A flicker of recognition. The same angular cheekbones Clara saw in the mirror every morning. Elisa sat back, exhaling sharply. It might be him. Do you want to know for sure? Elisa nodded, almost imperceptibly. I think I do. Back home, she waited until Clara had finished her dinner before bringing it up. They sat on the porch again, the sky turning lavender. Above them, I might have found someone, Elisa said gently. Clara looked up, her eyes widening slightly. His name is Jake. I don't know for sure if he's the one. But I met him once, a long time ago. And there's a chance. Clara absorbed this, quiet for a long moment. Are you going to talk to him? Only if you want me to. Clara thought, then said, what if I don't want anything to change? What if I just want things to stay the way they are? Elisa nodded. Then that's what we'll do. But what if I'm just afraid of what I'll find? Then we face that together. The next day, Elisa sent a short, carefully worded letter. Not an email, not a call. Just a letter, handwritten, honest. Hi Jake, I'm not sure if you'll remember me. My name is Elisa Torres. We met briefly in Pittsburgh in the summer of 2009. I've recently come across a possibility that may involve you in a personal matter regarding a child I gave birth to in 2010. I'm not asking for anything. Only your willingness to speak, if you're open to it. I understand this may come as a surprise, and I hope you receive it with care. My intentions are respectful and careful. If you're open to a conversation, please reach out. With sincerity, Elisa Torres. She mailed it the same afternoon. Then the waiting began. 5 days passed, then 6. On the 7th day, a number Elisa didn't recognize called her phone. She let it ring once, then twice. Her hands were shaking. On the 3rd ring, she picked up. A warm, slightly weathered voice spoke. Hi, is this Elisa Torres? She froze. Yes. Speaking. This is Jake Rivers. I got your letter. Silence filled the space between their words. I wasn't sure if I should call, he said. But I read it twice. And I think I remember you. Vaguely, the Copper Line, right? Long time ago. Elisa nodded even though he couldn't see her. Yes. It was one night. I didn't know how else to do this. I appreciate the honesty, Jake said. I've got no idea if this involves me. But if it does, I'd want to know. A pause. Elisa took a breath. Would you be open to a paternity test? Jake didn't hesitate. Yeah, I would. And just like that, the door opened. That night, Elisa told Clara. They sat together on the floor of her room, surrounded by books and pillows and bits of normal life. He called. Elisa said. He remembered me. He's open to finding out. Clara was quiet for a while. Okay, she finally whispered. Let's find out. But Elisa saw the fear in her daughter's eyes. Not of a man she hadn't met, but of what knowing the truth might change about who she was, and Elisa, too, knew. Whatever came next wasn't just about biology. It was about identity, memory, and trust, and those things didn't come from DNA, they came from the choice to stay, and to love. The DNA test arrived in a slim, unassuming envelope. No ceremony, no weight to its physical form, just a sheet of paper that could change everything. Elisa stood in the kitchen, staring at it for nearly an hour before opening it. She didn't want to be alone when she read it, but she also didn't want to bring Clara into the room with her heart in her throat. She finally slid a butter knife under the flap, hands trembling. She read the results once, twice, and again, as if each pass might alter the meaning. Probability of paternity, 99.99%. Jake Rivers, confirmed biological father. It wasn't a shock. It wasn't even relief. It was gravity. The truth she'd spent years avoiding had finally landed. That evening, Elisa told Clara everything. They sat side by side on her bed, the DNA results resting quietly between them. He is your biological father, Elisa said softly. His name is Jake Rivers. He lives in Ohio. He's willing to meet, but only if you want to. Clara didn't cry. She didn't react with excitement or fear. She just nodded slowly, as if absorbing a truth already long suspected. Do you want to meet him? Elisa asked. Clara thought for a moment. I think I want to see his face. Hear his voice. That's all. So they arranged a meeting. It was a Saturday afternoon in a small coffee shop halfway between Pennsylvania and Ohio, a neutral space, surrounded by soft jazz and the hum of espresso machines. Jake arrived right on time, wearing a dark blue flannel shirt and jeans. His hair was grayer than in the photo Priya had found, and he walked with a subtle limp. But his smile was warm. Nervous. Real. Clara stood beside Elisa, her grip tight but not afraid. Jake approached slowly, giving them space. Hi, he said gently. Clara? She nodded. Hi. He looked at Elisa, eyes filled with a kind of quiet recognition, not just of her face, but of the years that had passed since they'd last crossed paths. I want to thank you for letting me be here, Jake said. I didn't expect this. But I'm grateful. They sat. Talked for an hour. About simple things, Clara's school, her love for sketching, Jake's small business and the dog he rescued. They didn't talk about the past. Not yet. This was about establishing something new, something that didn't need to be defined right away. When the hour ended, Clara stood and smiled gently. I'm glad I met you, she said. Jake nodded, emotion catching in his throat. Me too. But Clara didn't ask for another meeting. Not immediately. She wasn't sure yet what she wanted from him, and that was okay. On the ride home, she turned to Elisa and asked, Is it weird that I'm not overwhelmed? That I don't feel some huge hole filled? No, Elisa said. Because the hole was never in your DNA. It was in the uncertainty. And you've answered it. Clara looked out the window, watching trees blur into dusk. I feel like I'm whole. Finally. Back home, they resumed their life slowly. August slipped into September, and school returned with its steady rhythm. Clara began drawing again, filling pages with layered portraits, some of her mother, some abstract, and one unmistakably of Jake, sitting with a coffee mug in his hands. She didn't frame it. Just kept it tucked between her sketchbooks. One evening, while folding laundry, Elisa paused over a small tank top of Clara's, one she'd outgrown, still holding the faded scent of childhood. She sat on the bed and wept softly, not from grief, not from fear, but from the fragile, beautiful ache of a chapter closing. She had spent 15 years defining motherhood through fear, fear of not being enough, of losing her daughter, of failing to protect her. But now, something had shifted. She didn't just have custody, she had Clara's trust, and no paper, no judge, no blood test could ever match that. On Clara's 16th birthday, they lit a cake in the kitchen and laughed when the candles wouldn't blow out the first time. Afterward, Clara sat beside Elisa and leaned her head on her shoulder. You're my mom, she said quietly. You always will be. That's the only truth I need. And Elisa, finally, let herself believe it, not because the court had said so, not because the test had confirmed what biology once denied, but because Clara had chosen her again, and that, not blood, not law, not chance, was what made them family.